Good afternoon, and welcome to today's AdWeek webinar, When Marketing Meets Analytics, an Attribution Love Story. Here we are on Fat Tuesday with President's Day coming up on Monday, but we're really looking at the Valentine's Day holiday with a really actually more of a look at attribution, and we've got some great speakers here today. I'm Stuart File, Custom Publishing Director of AdWeek, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to go through a few things about the On24 platform, just to familiarize everyone with it. If you've been on one of these before, just bear with me. The formal presentation will go for about 35 to 40 minutes. Afterwards, we will have time for questions for today's great panel of speakers. So if you do have a question for them, please use the Q&A widget at the bottom of your On24 console. We will also be supporting social sharing, and we'll be using the hashtag AttributionLove, which you will see on some of our following slides. So you can follow along on Twitter that way. We'll be live tweeting out some of the slides. If you're there and you're attending today and you want to let us know, just announce yourself over on Twitter. Join some of the conversation that's going to be going on over there. If you'd like for one of your colleagues to attend today's webinar, whether live now or on demand, and the webinar itself will be available on demand about 2 hours after the end of our live presentation. There is a widget down there on the bottom of your screen, looks like a paper airplane, and that will bring up a pre-populated email with a link over to the registration page for today's event. So feel free again to share with your colleagues, have them come on in and join us today, whether live now or on demand later on. One other widget to point out there is the resource list, and in there you'll find some valuable links, including a link over to the AdWeek webinar page, as well as over to the page for Neustar, today's event sponsor. And you'll also find a copy of the slides in there as well. Let me just give you a sense of what we're going to have here, and I will also be introducing today's speakers. Again, this is our brief agenda, and you'll see what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hearing from Forrester Research, one of our special guest speakers, going over some of the customer behavior and measurement trends, and then our speaker from Forrester, Tina Moffett, will also be overseeing a panel discussion with our experts today. And again, these are our speakers, and our experts are pretty great as well. So as you see, we've got Tina, who is, again, a senior analyst over at Forrester. And she serves as the customer insights professional. So she focuses on things like customer measurement, marketing effectiveness measurement, best-in-class marketing, and customer metrics. And we're also joined by Katie Casavant, who is the CEO of Kantar Shopcom. And she's a 20-year veteran of retail purchase behavior analytics, understands the analytics and insights of shopping behavior. And she had come over to Kantar Shopcom. She was with Cannondale Associates, which is now part of the Kantar Retail Consulting. And we're also joined by Jon Vein, who is the Chief Strategy Officer over at Neustar. Jon, of course, was the co-founder of Marketshare, which was an independent company that is now part of Neustar, joined the Neustar family end of last year. Marketshare, of course, had a significant impact allocating over $200 billion in marketing investments for more than half of the Fortune 50 companies, as well as other companies around the globe. So without further ado, let's get into the formal presentation. Let me pass this over to Tina.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. And thank you, everybody, for taking time out during your day to attend this really exciting webinar on when marketing meets analytics, a love story. So my name is Tina Moffett. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research. And before we go into the Q&A portion with Jon and Katie, I just wanted to share with you some consumer and market trends overview to set the stage, to give you a sense of why measurement and broader marketing analytics is important today, and that will help you understand why this should be really a mandate for you going forward when you're thinking about developing a marketing strategy. So, based on some Forrester consumer techno data, for the 10th year, Forrester has examined North American consumer technographic benchmark surveys to understand the attitudes and behaviors that shape consumer technology adoption and preferences. Now, in this report and with this data, we share deep findings around how consumers use technology and consume media across almost 2,000 data points and data on more than 150 brands. In 2015, what we found was the average U.S. online adult uses more consecutive devices. 70% use smartphones. Younger generations, for example, lead in technology uptake, with Gen Ys leading the way for early adopters of things like wearables and internet-connected TVs, while older generations lag behind. But even members of the golden generations now use laptops and consume more media and access social network sites. So given all this rich data and information that we did receive from the consumer technographics survey, what we did find is that there's just a general increase in terms of usage of connected devices. We found that Gen Xers, for example, use the highest number of connected devices right after Gen Y, which they use about 4.5 on average. They're less likely than Gen Zers to use smartphones, but more likely to use things like a tablet thanks to their greater purchasing power, right? So the point of this information is to demonstrate that customers are connected. They're not using one device. They're not even using two devices. They're using upwards to 4 to 5, closer to 5 devices. Their attentions can be easily distracted. Brands only have milliseconds to capture their attention. They're multitasking. They're on the go. Further, what we found was that those people who are connecting, they're connecting from various locations. Now, what seems to be happening is that they're not only connecting within their home, but they're connecting in their living room and bedroom and even their bathroom, with a high percentage connecting and browsing across different rooms. But even outdoors and in stores, they're connecting when it's convenient for them, and then when they want to find out more information about something, or if they want to check in on their social sites or connect with family members. So again, not only do they have the quantity of devices to connect, but they're connecting everywhere. The information for them is important, it's available, and they have access to it. And this really makes measurement difficult. When we recently asked in our 2015 BT marketing survey, only 46% of responders say that they can accurately attribute customers to marketing campaigns and sales to marketing campaigns. Now, this figure may seem low, and the reason why it's low is because of the numbers that I just provided. Connectivity, where they're connecting, how quickly they're connecting, and the elusiveness of the customer. They have access to so much information. They can quickly weave in and out of different touch points and different transaction points. And marketers are really left wondering how they should measure those interactions, and more importantly, how to predict what they should do next. Well, attribution can certainly help with that. Now, attribution is an advanced way to fractionally allocate credit, but more importantly, attribution modeling can help optimize your next interaction. it's a better way to move away from last touch and last click credit to a more advanced way using marketing analytics to measure more effectively. Now, what are some of the additional benefits of attribution? First, it empowers the marketer to spend more wisely. Over 90% of marketers use attribution to better allocate marketing dollars to ensure future marketing efforts. CMOs are demanding that their teams stretch that existing media and marketing budgets while still meeting their acquisition and retention goals. By understanding how to accurately measure channels, campaigns, and marketing tactics, you can spend more with your budget on your tactics that are working and divest from tactics and channels that are really failing. You become more accurate with your measurement. Secondly, attribution does increase accuracy of measurement of things like cross-channel effects. Attribution provides laser precision performance measurement across individual tactics or a combination of tactics. For instance, attribution can provide deep cross-channel insights such as how television affects search or how an email impacts direct-to-site, for example. This allows marketers to uncover best cross-channel campaigns or how they should reach their customers, the best sequencing or frequency. Attribution forces channel managers to work together and develop this holistic measurement strategy approach, and leading into a more holistic marketing approach. It helps marketers predict how they should change their buys going forward to get the best lift in performance. And finally, attribution provides a deeper path to purchase. Deeper path to purchase is different from understanding marketing and media efficiency and effectiveness. Cross-channel attribution itself involves maintaining a history of online and some offline transaction that a company has with its customers. Things like cookies and identifiable indicators to identify your digital presence with things like traditional direct response or even offline touch points. What we found in a recent survey was attribution users indicate that over 50% of their respondents track at least 10 channels or more. And the most frequently tracked channels are online display, paid search, and advertising, and social advertising. And what this does, it provides a deeper sense of how people are moving in and out of those marketing exposures, what they're being exposed to, along what time frame, how frequently they're being exposed to. And what this gives us a sense of is how effective are those marketing tactics along that customer journey and pushing them further down the journey from awareness and consideration to purchase and to repurchase. Now, this gives us a sense of how we can how marketers can recreate that purchase path for customers that may look like highly valuable customers. So there are three of those core benefits to attribution. Now that I've shared with you some of the consumer-based trends and the marketing-based trends, why don't we get started in our panel discussion? We have Katie from Kantar and Jon Vein from Marketshare on the line. And I think the first question, just to level set the discussion is, what is marketing attribution? What does it mean? Now, at Forrester, we have a specific definition, but I'm going to call on Jon Vein right now. Jon, are you there?
I am here.
Hi, Jon. Great.
Hello.
So why don't you take a stab at it just to level set? I pulled up how we define it at Forrester. Why don't you give us a bit of a deeper kind of reply as to what is attribution?
I think I'll answer it sort of in two ways. One is I'm not a big fan of the term attribution because sort of by definition it's retrospective in nature. And knowing what worked and did not work in the past, I think, is absolutely critical. But I think what's much more important and what the CMOs generally care about is, what should I spend, where should I spend it, what's going to happen in the future. I think the other term, I think deficiency in the term is to people who sort of live in our world, the term attribution connotes the digital world, the addressable world. And the reality is other than maybe my 12-year-old son, I don't know a lot of people who just exist in the digital world. So with those sort of two limitations, what I think for me, and I think for our company, what attribution means is getting a sort of a 360 view of the consumer and all the different stimuli that affect the consumer. And that could be anything going on in the digital world, media and so forth. It could be things like weather and pricing and so forth. And then getting an understanding of how those different stimuli have affected people retrospectively. And then again, very, very importantly, going forward. And then the last dimension I would say to that is sort of CMO, we believe, cares both about the very aggregate decisions, how much should I spend around the world and how do I allocate that across business units and geographies and media buckets, but also very importantly, and where the world is headed, is to the very, very disaggregate world. What ad do I serve up to what person at what time? So I don't know if I over-answered your question, but that to me is what attribution.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. This is Katie. I would agree absolutely with what Jon said, and just add even a further point of emphasis on the importance of the predictability of attribution, and sort of rather than what does attribution mean, rather ask the question, why attribution? The whole point is to understand, building on what we have understood happened historically, being able to predict what we think will happen futuristically so that we can then, place those dollars, whether from a macro level perspective or from a micro level perspective, place them where they will have the greatest impact on the relationship between the consumer and the brand.
Agreed. And from my perspective, I've been researching this for 4.5 years, and I was a practitioner in this space for about 11 years prior. One of the biggest challenges was always, how can we rely on last credit and move to how can we kind of abandon last credit and move towards a more sophisticated way of measuring? And that's one piece of attribution to me, and that's the huge value of it, right? Is that it will truly tell you the performance, but you can't stop there. It's got to have a predictive notion to it, a predictive capability to it to help guide what you should do next. And it's just not, for me, it's never just been about digital. It's been about all channels. It's been about getting that holistic view of marketing exposure. You can't just rely on digital. You can't just rely on mobile, or you can't just rely on television or your traditional channels. It's got to be connected because the consumer is connected. So I agree with both your sentiments. It's about accuracy and measurement, but more importantly, it's about predicting what you should do next. So next question. What are some of the benefits does attribution bring to brands? I listed out some, but Katie, maybe can you provide us a little bit more details in terms of what you've seen, some of the benefits brands reap for more accurate measurement and optimization through attribution?
Well, I'm sure they're the obvious ones that we've already spoken to. If you understand better how different aspects of your investment along the consumer, path to purchase and the consumer journey, if you understand what those different elements across that path are yielding, obviously you can make more wiser investments with increasingly limited dollars. But I think from a brand's perspective, one of the very important things about being able to understand the different touch points along this increasingly complex and perpetually connected path, which is sort of an ongoing communication and relationship between a consumer and brand, is I think the brand wants to understand what type of interaction with what type of consumer is going to yield the result that I want, which is more often than not, at the end of the day, the sale of another product or whatever it happens to be. And we can't assume, as you've already pointed out, Tina, that consumers are relating to brands in the same way on the same set of devices. It's a very fragmented, fractured space. We also can't assume that consumers are reacting to the same attributes that a brand possesses. So one of those attributes may be more able to be actualized in a certain type of content with a certain type of communication on a certain type of device on a certain type of platform, whereas another consumer or group of consumers might be more responsive and drawn to a different attribute of that brand, which lends itself to a different type of communication, which lends itself to delivery on a different platform via a different device, et cetera, and really understanding in a very microscopic, detailed way what those interactions look like enables us to then make the decisions to leverage attribution technologies to be able to make the decisions we need to make around investment so that we can optimize the result that we're looking for.
Right. Yeah, and I don't have a ton to add to that other than at the end of the day, what are you solving for? And I think what we're all solving for with these techniques is the old John Wanamaker. Half my marketing doesn't work, and I just don't know which half. And when you're looking at a global ad spend of $700 to $800 billion, that's a lot of money that is being wasted. So elevating the marketing function from being an expense to being an investment and serving as a bridge between marketers and the finance department is, you were asking about what are some of the benefits, and I think that takes at least some of the emotion out of the decision when you start using objective approaches.
Yeah, and I think from what I've seen through my research is all the benefits that Jon and Katie have listed out, but I want to kind of go back to the consumer insights benefit of it, right? Because attribution or any type of marketing analytics approaches and insights that you receive, the immediate effect and insight is how is my marketing performance and where can I optimize? But I think we're slowly moving into looking at those marketing insights and saying, okay, where should I optimize for different customer segment types, and how can I personalized content and offer and build a marketing plan for different types of segments or even different type of individual customers so I can push them quickly through the purchase path, have them convert, and then foster them to be loyal. And that is almost a byproduct of marketing analytics and attribution and optimization, is that, yes, you're optimizing against your buys, but you're also trying to optimize the customer experience and customer interactions. And that takes on a different, takes on a bit of a different strategy. It elevates marketing's purpose from just pushing out messages and content and advertising to pushing out the right messages, the right content, the right advertising across different customers, and that becomes and it transforms your organization to be more customer centric.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did you want to move on to the next question?
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that in addition to segments, one of the questions is sort of the temporal piece. Is are you looking to have a lot of attribution is very DR oriented. What can I do to make somebody do something right now? And that, and I will cover some of this a little bit later, but what about the brand? What about the long-term effects? Because you could do a lot of things that might drive short-term sales that could have profoundly negative impacts on the long-term value of the company. And the other dimension that you mentioned is customer centricity, and it's one of the reasons we're so excited to be acquired by Neustar, because they have, we believe, the best data around identity. And so being able to know who the person is, do they have a predisposition to convert so that you don't really need to serve up an ad to them. Those sorts of things I think are where the world's headed. And you said it, Tina, but a customer experience as opposed to sort of a shotgun approach.
Absolutely, and I think one of the interesting things about looking at attribution from this perspective, when we think beyond purely that the immediate response, the DR response, as Jon referenced, to the longer term relationship between the consumer and the brand, which ultimately should translate into a strong revenue relationship between the consumer and the brand. It allows us to begin to think very differently about combining different analytic and methodological techniques, bringing techniques that might be more readily associated with, brand and consumer insight, combining that with techniques that might be more classically associated with direct response measurement and closed loop measurement and sort of purchase behavior based analytics where we're always plagued by a certain amount of lag because we have to wait for the consumer to respond and to buy and for that to show up in the data and so forth and so on. But combining techniques with all the innovation that has impacted both can allow us to create very, very powerful approaches to understanding what's actually happening and to predict what actually will happen, and create, in essence, by combining more traditional approaches, create something new out of that, and in so doing, solve some of the problems that plague, I'll say, some of the measurement solutions around lag times and allow us to move into more real-time types of solutions which naturally lend themselves more to predictive applications.
Right. And this is a good segue into my next question. Jon, can you kind of go a little bit deeper on the differences between these different attribution methodologies?
Yeah, I mean, the world sort of started off when people started looking at these things, as I mentioned, sort of in a DR sort of way, and we're really looking at last click. And I'm sort of conflicted, frankly, because a lot of smart people with a lot of resources really kind of sold what I think is not only snake oil, but has become largely the currency for online sales. And Magic Johnson didn't get to be famous because he was scoring a lot of baskets. It's because he was assisting. And so as the world sort of evolved, we moved into multi-touch, looking at the journey, and then a number of companies came up with approaches where they were using rules. Well, if you were 3 steps before, you get a certain amount of attribution. And then over time, companies have gone ahead and used algorithmic approaches where they're letting the data speak for itself rather than imposing one's view. That all being said, in order to do those sorts of approaches, and it really is sort of where most companies sit right now, they really tend to look at addressable media. Some do look at offline effects, but they tend to do it in a very limited way. And I'll give you an example. I don't care how good your online campaign is. If the competition cuts their price in half, that's going to have a bigger impact on anything that marketing can do. And as people tend to move up the from the less granular, the more granular to the less granular, I think that what we need to do is see these algorithmic approaches really bring in thorough and thoughtful offline approaches as well, and Katie was speaking to that.
Yeah, and there's you mentioned something that I think is hugely important, and I have at other occasions referred to it as the dirty little secret of measurement, is that there are many solutions out there that, for a host of reasons, are forced to make the assumption that the causal factors that impact consumer choice and consumer decisioning, you mentioned the case of your competition dropping their price in half, that's going to have an impact. Oh yes, it's going to have a very, very significant impact. It's also going to have an impact if a customer walks in the store and they're almost bowled over by a huge display of something, of a product. That also is going to have an impact. Those in-store causal factors are hugely important and have a tremendous impact on the consumer decisioning process. And that sort of dirty little secret that I referenced before is that for limitations in the ecosystem, there are many solutions that are forced to make the assumption that the causal environment in the store is the same everywhere.
Yep.
In other words, as an example, every supermarket in the U.S. has the same in-store causal environment. Nothing could be further from the truth. So that dirty little secret actually has a massive downstream impact, negative one, mind you, on measurement and attribution, whether it's very sophisticated algorithmic or something less so. So I think as we think about best-in-class attribution solutions, they're really going to be only as good as the data that is inputted into them to drive the output. Thus, Jon's comment about being so excited to be a part of Neustar, with where the understanding of the consumer profile is so rich. That's hugely important, understanding those causal factors that actually have nothing to do with advertising and communication and so forth, but can dramatically distort results to the tune of 30-45%.
One of the things that I often tell people when I'm in rooms pitching or otherwise is most marketers really understand the dynamics of their business pretty well, or they probably wouldn't be in those positions. But so whenever we're looking at models, or we're telling them when they're looking at competitors, for example, I ask them to really kind of zoom out, sort of an AWACS view of the battlefield, and say, what do you think affects the decisions? And Katie gave a good example, shopper marketing. Of course that has an impact. Most attribution companies ignore that. And so you don't need to have a PhD in statistics to know whether or not your provider is taking proper approaches. So I always tell them to hit pause, make sure you're identifying all the things, all the dynamics that can impact the business, from weather to pricing to all the different things. And I think that if I were going to leave anybody with that, don't underestimate your own knowledge about your business dynamics, and don't, just because somebody's walking in the room with a PhD sitting next to them, know that they think that they know better than you.
Yeah. Common sense still counts.
Right. And, from my perspective, I talk to a lot of marketers, and that's exactly what I say, is that whomever you're engaging with in building an attribution model, you need to ask questions in terms of the approach, right? And then also in terms of, is this a right fit for my business? Are we accounting for everything? From a marketing and media perspective, and also from Jon, from what you were saying, from a non-marketing effects perspective, and also from a customer perspective. Who are my customers? How do they engage with me? How do they move in and out? And the conversation becomes broader. It naturally starts around marketing and media, measurement and optimization, but then it starts to become, how can marketing and media drive my business? How can marketing and media help me engage with my customers more? But you as a buyer need to have that conversation of what is the right approach, and am I including all the information I need to include about my customers, about my business, about the industry into this model to help me understand marketing performance and optimize better. So next question, with the advent of all these different devices and kind of different channels, how specifically has mobile changed the way we use attribution to measure and optimize across channel?
I can jump in, and it's obviously a very, very important medium. At the end of the day, in the most dispassionate description, it's just another stimuli to consumers, but it is profoundly important, and it both creates enormous problems because there are multiple identifiers across different devices, different interaction points, and things tend to get more complex. The flip side is, at that point with mobile devices, if you have the right identity data, you can go ahead and, again, target the right person at the right time with the right message to not only get the business impact you want in terms of the potential transaction, but also have a much better experience with a consumer, and that inures to the long-term benefit of the brand. It's also, as I mentioned before, if you know who the person is, You take a look at the history of marketing. It used to be just broadcast, and that's not going to go away. But then you start getting more and more narrowcast to different types of audiences and so forth. But when you know it's John or Jane Doe, and they already have a propensity to behave in a certain way, that could make your marketing much more effective. So knowing that you have really solid identity data is critical.
And the only thing I would add to that is that I think aside from all the complexities that mobile introduces into the subject of attribution and frankly many other subjects, I think it's also just fundamentally transformative in terms of the opportunity it creates for brands to interact with consumers. I mean, it's a well-worn phrase. It's anywhere, anytime, always on, and just it's a little bit of a cliche now, but it's hugely powerful. Realizing that the majority of brands' consumers are walking around with a device in their hand that allows that brand, basically invites that brand to interact with the consumer, if done well, on a virtually continuous basis. That's a fundamentally different, it seems to me that fundamentally changes the opportunity.
Yeah.
That
as long as you know who they are, because otherwise, if you use offline identity and connect that to mobile and online identity, then it makes sense. Otherwise, you're just talking to a device. And
absolutely. I'm making the assumption that we know who they are. That if we know who they are, it's such a transformative change. And frankly, I think it also ups the consumer expectation of how brands use that medium is also greatly increased as well.
Yeah, for me, it's not when I think about mobile and mobile's place in attribution, it's about yes, you have the challenges with measurement, and the challenge with mobile is identity and device stitching, and then the measurement piece for that, once you have that solved, which is not an easy feat, the measurement piece is something that you just do that is, I don't want to say it's table stakes, but you can measure mobile once you connect. But the opportunity is exactly what we've been talking about here. It's not on the measurement side, it's on the optimization side. And it's not the optimization piece of we're going to buy media more effectively on mobile. It is we can personalize messages, we can enhance the experience, we can create experiences and reach customers at the right moment and the right time. That is the opportunity that marketing analytics professionals have, but they need to get the attribution piece right, both in the measurement and the prediction and the optimization piece of attribution. Great. Okay, so moving on, next question. How can brand managers use attribution to understand how brand marketing drives revenue? And just a bit of background on this question. I think with attribution, you always measure to a conversion, right, to a sales conversion. But for the traditional brand marketers whose job it is to kind of drive awareness and drive brand message, how can they use attribution? Katie, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I sort of spoke to it a little bit more because it's a subject of particular interest to me. But I think that the opportunity for brand marketers is to, as I mentioned before, combine some of their traditional techniques delivered on different platforms, gaining the types of brand insight, brand attribute insights vis-a-vis different consumer segments, different target groups, understanding what amongst those consumers is it about the brand that actually drives their sales conversion, because it isn't the same for each group of consumers. So that's taking sort of traditional marketing techniques delivered through today's technology and real-time types of gathering of that insight, layering that in combination with what we know about those consumers before we survey them, et cetera, et cetera. Are they loyal to a brand? Are they a buyer of their brand, et cetera, et cetera? Understanding them, having knowledge about that consumer from a purchase perspective prior to surveying them for brand insight. Once you get that information back from the sort of classical brand type of analysis, combining those things allows you to then predict which attributes and which messages and which connections you need to make with what type of consumers to get the conversion response that you want. I think combining those techniques is hugely important for today's and tomorrow's brand marketers.
Yeah, and I would just add slightly to that is that to get really geeky, when we build our models, we look at many different outcome variables. So, of course, profits and sales and so forth are in there, but we also put brand metrics, and what we often find is certain drivers of behavior that might benefit one KPI, like sales, have a negative impact on long-term value. So the good news is that when you do, as Katie said, properly, and I say properly because a lot of companies are, we believe, not doing it properly, but if you properly combine those various techniques together, you're able to get a quantitative trade-off to know that, okay, I want to sell an X number of units in the next 3 months. That will have a downstream impact on the brand. And one dimension of brand is, what am I going to sell if I shut off marketing? There's some value of what you're going to get for free, and you can erode that by not marketing properly, by cutting your price too much. All of a sudden, people can go from a premium brand to a low-cost brand if they do too many pricing promotions and so forth. So, looking at multiple outcomes and making sure those are part of your holistic framework is important.
So now that we've kind of went through kind of attribution, the benefits, the role of mobile, how brand marketers can use attribution, what are some of the ingredients for success, for attribution success? Jon, why don't you start?
Okay. I mean, I think most importantly is what are you solving for? You can come in and have the best math and the best data and the best everything, but if you don't have a consensus across the stakeholders, the decision makers within a company, you're a science experiment. So first thing you need to know is what are you solving for? Are you trying to increase profits? Are you trying to increase brand value? Trying to do both? Once you kind of get everybody to drive some form of consensus, then you need to know that you're going to go ahead and you might want to, I guess, go to the next slide, or if Katie wants to chime in. Sure. But then identify the data that represents the different stimuli that affect consumers, and this is sort of a subset, but there's obviously paid, earned, and owned. There's external factors, controllable, non-controllable, and sort of, and you make sure that you get good data, because again, if you don't have good data, it doesn't matter whether you have the right analytics or the right technology. So making sure you get your data right and really triple check it before you start putting it through the rest of the workflow, and then. Identity is I think we've all echoed here, is we're in the fortunate world of having marketing go much more consumer centric. So make sure that you have identity data, that it's fresh. A number of companies will refresh their identity data quarterly or monthly or annually, but if you want to make sure you're sending an ad to the right person on a mobile device, it better be. I just texted somebody and it was an old phone number for somebody, so I just had that happen to myself. And that it's accurate. And again, we tend to find the best approaches there are leaning on deterministic data as opposed to probabilistic. And again, I'm getting geeky there, but know that it's Jane or John Doe as opposed to using algorithms to say it's probably Jane or John Doe, and that it's relevant, that you know the different dimensions of the consumer that are important for your brand. And then echoing is getting the math right, and that's probably the thing we're probably most religious about.
And the only thing that I would add on to that, Tina, because John's absolutely right about all those points. I think because there is a fair amount of complexity in the infrastructure required to make all the quote-unquote how parts of an attribution solution work well and work well together. It's not easy to make sure you've got the right and the best data. It's not easy to make sure that everything is connected properly. It's not easy necessarily to get to the right math, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of effort is expended around those very, very important questions. Where I think it is tempting, perhaps unintentionally, well, I'm certainly unintentionally, for organizations to sort of fall down is understanding that once you have these solutions, the insight and the perspective that it is going to give an organization can be incredibly disruptive and should be disruptive, or, why bother, right? And organizations' willingness to sort of embrace that disruption and really question the way they do some of the things they do and why they do some of the things they do, and start to really poke at some of those sacred cows. Because to get the real benefit of a really, really good attribution solution is going to cause downstream impacts across an organization well beyond the folks who think about attribution day and night. And that gets challenging on all sorts of other levels. And, there are sometimes challenges, we human beings would prefer to defer to another day. But you really can't. If you're going to go with this kind of change, you got to go all the way.
Yeah.
This last slide is exactly what I think you were saying, because and I think it goes back to the very first one, which is if you get the people on the same page at the inception, then when things are coming out the back end of your analytical solutions, it's much, much easier to drive adoption. And we've crossed that threshold where these approaches are nice to have, and they need to have. They're need to haves. If you're not doing it, your competition will be, and they will have a competitive advantage.
Yep. Exactly. I think at Forrester, when I talk to a lot of marketers and a lot of the decision makers for any type of marketing analytics solutions, and for them, for the ones that are successful in using analytics, predictive analytics to understand and optimize marketing, for them, they have a really good understanding of their data, and I firmly believe that it starts with data and understanding the underlying data that you do have from marketing, from consumers, transactional, first-party systems that hold the data and how they connect together. They have a data advocate, and they understand that, and then it comes to having that right partner that is a strategic partner to help them guide them through these tough decisions and these insights and what they should do next. So that's what we see. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's about having the right partner, having the right advocate within the organization, and really knowing your data. So with that, I am going to pass it back to Stuart, who will take us through some Q&A for the last 12 minutes. Stuart?
Great, and thank you, Tina and John and Katie. A lot of great information. Just a few quick reminders to the audience. We've got a lot of questions that have come in, but if you do have a question for today's speakers, please use the Q&A widget down there on the bottom of your screen. We're going to get to as many as we can in this last 5 or so minutes that we're going to have for it. I'm also going to make sure that we forward all the questions over to today's speakers afterwards. So if they do have a chance to get to some of your answers offline. Just another quick reminder that the webinar itself will be available on demand, so if you have a colleague who you'd like to share this with, please send them to the on-demand version. Everyone will be getting a link to that in their email about 2 hours after the end of the webinar today. And if you enjoyed this webinar and you'd like to sign up for another upcoming AdWeek event, www.adweek.com/webinars, or follow us on Twitter. A lot of people have been doing that already. That's at AW Webinars. That's with an S at the end, and you'll find us there. So let's jump into a few quick questions here. We've got a lot to go through. Tina, let me send one your way here. Someone was asking about whether you need to consider buying a DMP, a demand management platform, before you have some kind of an attribution solution. Does Forrester have a take on some of that?
Yeah, I think DMP can provide insights into customer behaviors, customer segments on the digital side, could provide insights in terms of the types of customers that you have access to, and certainly help with targeting. DMP adds a dimension of insights to your attribution models. Do I think it's necessary? I think that you should rely on the data that you first have, first and foremost, right? First-party data. I think you should look at the additional data that you have coming in from marketing and media, digital media perspective, data that you have access to measure more effectively. And then I think you should layer on DMP information that could bring added lift and insights on top of the existing data that you already have. I also think it depends on if your data has gaps and if those gaps can be filled with a DMP as well. And if it can be, then you need to consider a DMP.
Again, as an analytics / software company, we're big fans of DMPs because the biggest friction in our business is getting the data into the models and into the software. And so when the data is all scrubbed in one place, it makes things much more efficient.
And I will add to what Jon just said, the biggest challenge that I hear from marketers is data. And marketers are not saying, oh, my vendor takes a long time to incorporate data. What they're saying is that I don't know my data, and by the time we got to using my data for measurement and insights, we found out that my first-party data is a mess. I have to standardize things. My data coming in from different sources, I don't know where they're coming in from. I don't know if those are outliers, and I think DMPs could potentially help manage that piece of it.
Now, there's another question here, and Katie, let me toss this one your way to start, and then Jon, I don't know if you want to come in on it as well. And I know we talked around this at the beginning when Tina was showing some of the number of devices, and then we were talking about some of the mobile issues. But one of the person asked here is, how can marketers properly track consumers across devices? In other words, how can they attribute a mobile device's role in a desktop conversion? Or how can you, if someone is walking down the aisle of their local superstore and seeing an offer on their mobile device, and ultimately they buy it off a desktop at home, so not even in store, how do we work sort of that kind of conversion?
Sure. It's not easy is the short answer. And it's typically not, a solution. The solve for that is typically not available from just one partner. It's really, our experience has been that it requires a network of partners working together very collaboratively with complementary areas of expertise to be able to basically stitch together a holistic view of the consumer, regardless of where that consumer is and on what device that consumer is interacting, or what space that consumer is interacting with the brands, et cetera. I think the way I would answer this question is as follows. It is our opinion that the best way to ensure that you are creating a holistic view of the consumer. Your question was about mobile, but it was bigger than that too. It's how do I make sure that the person I think I'm talking to is actually the person that I'm talking to. And we believe that ultimately one has to have at the center of your, let me call it a data spine, that at the center of that data spine really has to be ultimately fully anonymized name and address information, to which things like device IDs and cookies, which are very transient and expire and so forth, to which the various different identifiers of devices and platforms and so forth and so on are ultimately connected, because cookies go away, people change devices, those things are all transitory. Because cookie number 1, 2, 3 is associated with Katie Casavant doesn't mean that you know me, because one day that cookie is going to go away, et cetera, which we all know. The only way you can know you're actually talking to me is if somewhere at the center, at the nucleus of your data architecture is ultimately an anonymized version of my name and address. And the various, my various addresses going back from so forth and so on. And there are specific partners one uses to create that. And of course it has to be fully anonymized and privacy compliant and all the rest. But ultimately it is our belief that that has to be the core of your data spine. And to that you can connect almost anything.
And I know we got to be quick here, and I don't mean this to be a plug, but that again, what Neustar has been able to do is exactly what you said, Katie, because they among other things, they sit in the middle of caller ID between phone carriers, and so they know pretty much everybody's name, address, phone number, and then have appended data all the way around that, including cookies, which you said can be transitory, but what device and IP addresses and demographic information. So it's that identity that I think is so powerful that's going to guide the future of marketing.
It's looking like we're fast approaching the top of the hour here, and while we've got a lot of questions lined up, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time to get to any more. I want to thank today's speakers for some great information. I will make sure that they all get a copy of the questions that have come in, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get to some of these people offline. I also want to just quickly remind everyone in the audience, today's webinar will be available on demand. It will also be available and we'll send everyone an email about that. If you want to find out about, if you want a copy of today's slide deck, it's in the resource list widget down there on the bottom of your screen. And lastly, if you enjoyed this and you want to send a colleague to it or to another AdWeek webinar, www.adweek.com/webinars or at AW webinars, and we will look forward to seeing you at one of those again. Tina, Katie, and John, thanks for a lot of great information, a lot of things for people to digest, and thanks to our audience for taking time out of your busy day to attend today's event. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.